at the top of the whatever building, whatever your big reveal is. But I'm moving to Denver.
Oh no. Ah,
I know.
break my heart, Tracy.
Mine too, Zeke. I'm very sad. This piece of it is the part I'm the saddest about. The university, but this part I'm really sad about. So
What are you gonna do in Denver?
University of Colorado and Schutz program. They gave me an endowed chair position, a bunch of new swanky titles, and a whole bunch of money. So it was
Yeah.
hard. It was hard to say no, Zeke.
Mazel tov. Congratulations for that.
Thanks. It's hard. It was a really hard decision.
No, hey, listen, that sounds amazing, and good on you. I'm glad they
My
saw it.
husband's also a scientist, and he has some patents in the depression drug space. And so this also allows him to like take stuff and put it in human beings and see if it works. And that's as a scientist, that's like a huge opportunity. So he's really excited.
That's great. Good for y'all. All right, so we should get started. It is 5:32. Welcome to the Baltimore City Trauma Informed Care Task Force. It is May 5th, 2022. I'm Zeke Cohen, really excited to be joining you this evening. We have a packed meeting, and I'm really looking forward to introducing folks to my friend, Dr. Tracy Bale. Sorry. We are also being recorded. This is going to be on YouTube. So just a heads up, these meetings are public. So in any case, it is great to have folks on. Anne is putting the agenda in the chat for tonight. We are going to start with a rounds question, and then we're going to hear from Dr. Bale. And then we're going to jump right into committees. With that, I'm going to pop it over to Anne to get us started on our rounds question.
All right. So for tonight, we are sharing a high and a low for the week. And we're going to spend 5 minutes in our rooms. So we're going to have a little bit longer to talk through how we're doing. So it's 5:33 right now. So at 5:38, we are going to come back after sharing a high and a low. Hi, Lindsay. How are you? Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
I know you're mute. Oh. Say it again.
Are we in breakout rooms?
We are in breakout rooms and people are going to come back in just a minute. But I can ask you the question. It's fairly simple. We're sharing a high and a low from the week.
I would probably be, my husband's been working on a renovation for our house for the past 6 months, and he finished this week. It's our bedroom. He was renovating our bedroom. So it was so exciting. We finally get to live back in our bedroom.
Yes. What was he doing?
He was just like renovate, like our house is built in the like a late 70s. So every room is just kind of needs updating. So he was doing like molding and painting and electrical work and just a bunch of stuff. So finally got that done. It was really nice. Yeah.
Oh, that's really nice. That's really nice.
And I don't know if there's been a low for the week necessarily. Just busy per usual.
Good. All right. Well, I am going to go ahead and pull people back. So here they come. Hi, Erica.
Hi.
So good to see you.
I know. I feel so bad because I was so excited when I joined the task force, and then I didn't realize, nobody told me executive director was this hard, and it's not the fun job. I knew it for 18 years. I tried not to have this job, but it's not. It's just, oh God. Yeah. So wait. It's not this. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. Okay. All right. Yeah, so I'm preparing for the ceasefire.
Yeah,
So
this
I can't
weekend.
say it, but so it starts tomorrow, and I'm driving home from Annapolis, but I got stuff to do when I get into Baltimore. But I wanted to still just pop in and apologize for being a deadbeat.
Listen, we still love you, Erica. We know you got your ceasefire coming tomorrow, and whatever you need from us, you just let us know.
But this is really important work, and I want to be a part of it. And I just feel bad that I feel like I have not been what I wanted to be on, as a part of this group. So and I'm also like, because I'm coming into my second year as executive director, I feel like things are not settled. Things aren't settling down, but I feel more confident in the role now.
Mm-hmm.
I was also handed a broken organization. It was in deficit and debt, and all the programming was really broken. And so, it's just been way harder than I thought it was going to be. But it's so I'm able to me and my deputy director were just talking about this recently, that I'm going to be scheduling myself in a way that I'm able to, because this really is a priority for me. So I want to be able to schedule myself in a way that, because it's not just about the meetings, I also haven't just been able to have time to keep up with all of the work that's being done on documents and reading things and giving my comments on things, and I've only been doing that here and there. So
listen, we appreciate you. We know you got a lot going on with community mediation and ceasefire and this task force, and so we love having you, and we'll get there. All right, so
thank you.
Definitely. All right, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had some very high highs and not so low lows. I'm really excited to introduce my very good friend, Dr. Tracy Beal. She is the director for the Center for Epigenetic Research in Child Health and Brain Development at the University of Maryland. Sadly, she will not be there for too much longer. She is also a boss woman and leads a, Tracy, tell me exactly what the thing is, but a big consortium of national folks who are in this space. And she is really one of the world's experts on epigenetics. Ann and I and some folks got a chance to check out her lab, which is at University of Maryland, and see like what happens as trauma is transferred among rats. And it was incredibly fascinating. So I'm pumped to have Dr. Bale here to talk to us today. And with that, Dr. Bale, take it away. Feel free to do the screen share or whatever else you need.
I have access. So first of all, I love listening to Zeke sort of make stuff up along the way here. So which is good. It sounds great. So I will get into that in a second of how I came to be as part of this. But thank you for the invitation, the chance. First of all, many of you, I've already had Zooms with many of you to talk about the summit. And so I'm going to talk just a tiny bit about what my center has been doing in Baltimore, which is how I met Zeke. And then the summit that we're going to host, which is why I'm here, because if I haven't reached out to you or you haven't written back, Erica, I would love to hear from you. We have a tentative agenda that Anne has sent to all of you. Day 1 is the community piece. Day 2 is more of the science. You are welcome to any and all of it, attending, participating. I have plugged many of you in. Zeke's doing a whole thing on the trauma-informed care and the task force and how it all came to be. So thank you again for letting me come. And I know that many of you are going to start rolling your eyes when I say the word science, but I want to say that it is important, because without the biology behind the impact of what trauma does and helping to understand it, we really wouldn't all be here to discuss that it has an effect, right? We need to understand when you experience trauma, and when you experience trauma matters to the brain, and the brain matters to everything. So that's why I'm here. So I'm going to share my screen, share my thing, and I'm just going to start talking, but interrupt whenever, comment whenever you got. So as Zeke said, I'm at the University of Maryland until July, which I'll then be in Denver. But I was recruited down here from Penn, where I was for 15 years. And so Anne asked me to talk a little bit about what the center does, and then a little bit about my science. And I'm just going to roll them all into this one slide initially to say, and I know that you all know this more than anybody, that our experiences shape our lens, and how we're looking at something is based upon the experiences we've had in our lives. And if you grew up in Baltimore versus if you grew up in Minnesota, which is where I grew up, you will look at life in very different ways. And who we are born to, how we're raised, who's around us, the experiences we have, they very much shape how we view, how we respond to things, how the kids in our classrooms respond to teachers and their classmates. It's all shaped by our experiences. So on the centerpiece that I direct, which is part of the campus and part of being in the city of Baltimore and how I met Zeke, it very much shapes how we interact, very much. I grew up in a tiny little town in southern Minnesota. And so my experiences around the world have very much been shaped outside of that. Again, who you meet, what you expect of other people when you're having conversations on this committee, what you expect or how you interpret what somebody does is very much shaped by how you grew up. So I grew up in the land of cheese, needless to say. And so outside of that, I went to the University of Washington in Seattle for my PhD, and then I did training down at the Salk Institute in San Diego, and then I was at Penn in Philadelphia for 15 years before coming to Baltimore. And so all of those things very much shape my experiences and how I engage in the city. And I know it does for all of you as well. And so as I was recruited down here from Penn to start this center, it's a big, long name. Basically what epigenetics means is you inherit your DNA from your mom and your dad, and you can't change that. But how you grow and develop, how your brain matures and responds, all of those experiences can modify aspects of what diseases you might be at risk for. Are you at risk for diabetes and hypertension? Are you at risk for PTSD and depression? That is shaped by our environment, and really that's epigenetics. So it's a big word, but really just means that you can't change the sequence of your DNA that you inherit, but you can change how it matters for how you engage in your environment. And that's everything about what I do for this center from the time that I came down here 5 years ago. And we started off by doing kind of things, civic-minded things in the community. So we did this thing with New York Times journalist Nicholas Kristof back when Lena Wen was here. And that was great. And it was lovely to get Nicholas Kristof, for those who know the work that he does for the New York Times and all of the books that he's done and championing women around the world. But it really wasn't impactful for how I like to think about what happens in the city of Baltimore. So we started doing different activities, really engaging, like in the community, working with children and families in different schools. And we really developed this program. And one of the programs we did was this great reading on the brain is what it's called. And it's a combination of science and art. We work with a local artist. So just reinforcing, teaching kids like, hey, here's what we learn about the brain. Here's why it matters. Here's how you engage with each other. Here's how you do actually have control over how you interact. You don't need to escalate. We don't need to yell. We don't need to escalate to violence. We can actually control all of this information, but it was reinforced with fun activities, or what I think of as fun, science and art. And this is actually one of my technicians in my lab teaching the kids about the brain. It's actually, it's a plastic brain. It's not a real brain in his hands there, teaching them about the different parts of the brain. And when you learn the parts of the brain, just like when you learn the parts of a car, you learn more about the car and how it functions. And that's why it's so important. We brought the kids into the lab. They did a cool science experiment one day where they got to isolate DNA and run it out on a gel. And they loved it. And their parents came in. It was a really fun activity. We did some activities at the schools, bringing the families in, different activities of science, again, and art, teaching them about engaging about the brain and the effect, again, of trauma on the brain, something we're all very interested in. And then we took this whole program and made it into a mural. I'll show you in a second. That's on the outside. This is Callaway Elementary. And this is where we brought every single kid in the entire school through one day, where they painted on these sheets that became the mural on the outside of the school. And the mayor at the time actually came and participated in painting. You can see there, he actually ended up with paint all over his suit coat, which was great. And through that activity is how I got invited to go to city council, which is how I interacted with Zeke. And so this mural, and so that because the mayor was there, the news came and they interviewed these kids who participated in this program. And you should have seen this newscaster as he's interviewing these kids. These are like second and third graders. And he's asking them questions about the brain. And this child here responded with this whole answer about the hippocampus and how he learned throughout this program that when he gets stressed, it affects his hippocampus. And if he takes a book and just loses himself in reading with his cousin, no matter what kind of violence is going on outside of his house, that it's really helpful to the hippocampus. And this newscaster was like, the hippo, what? It was such a great moment. These kids were so proud of all the information that they had learned. And so these are sheets of the mural that the kids paint. I'm not kidding. This is actually kids painted this, and the mayor. And so it's on the outside of the school. You can see in the background there, we had a big ribbon cutting ceremony. You can see Sonia Sanalise was there. The guy with the bow tie is actually the dean of the School of Medicine came. He was wowed by these kids. The principal of the school is there. It was great. The artist there with the t-shirt on, standing next to me, is Jay Wolf Schlossberg Cohen. He's done lots of murals around the city. It was a really, really great experience. It engaged not just the kids and the staff and the school, but their families, their guardians, and the community around, because it ended up being the mural on the school. So this is Callaway Elementary. It is a bit of a rundown school. All the water fountains, like oftentimes, are capped. Kids can't drink water. And so when the kids get off the school bus or walk in the front door, it was pretty abysmal. And so we worked with the school and how they wanted to do this mural. And so now you can see this is what it looks like now. And so not only is it, their work and colorful, but it's about the brain and the effects of trauma and the benefits of reading, which is a great message. But the kids in the mural, the kids that would participate in the program are the kids in the mural themselves. So it was great. So every day when they walk in the school, they were so proud of how their participation. And then the next year they became the leaders of the program. So again, really passing on the message about the benefits of reading, which is always a great accessible message. And now we took this program and we did a thing called Brain Camp. And we did this at some other schools. And then we bought these boxes, the free little library boxes. And so again, same kind of a thing. They participated in the program and they learned about it. They painted them on the boxes. We have a whole bunch of these. Some of them are in Zeke's community now. Zeke, we need to work on getting some press for that contribution for the local reading on the brain and the box. Anyway, so this has been really great. There's one down here in Rashfield. I live in Fed Hill. And so it's great to watch the turnover of the books. We fill them up with books. And within a couple of days, the kids are down there. They're going into their homes with these books, really, really beneficial again. Okay, so they're all over the city of Baltimore now, these boxes. Other activities because of this, been down on Sheila Katz's show on WYPR, spoke at city council meeting about the program, met with Zeke, talked about it. And so I want to talk about the Zeke Factor, because I think this is so important, that the Zeke Factor, which stimulates, I think everyone will speak to that on this task force, but if you follow him on Twitter, you know that Zeke is out in the community doing everything that's involved, spreading the word about trauma. I've even heard him say the word brain a couple times. He's actually used it in some of his tweets. I feel very proud of that. So as you're thinking about trauma, I think it's so important to also think about its lasting effects and really at the biological level. And that when we understand that, its impact, and in the city of Baltimore, the effects of trauma are really generational. And that's a lot of the science that I do. So that Zeke Factor, I've spoken at the National Press Foundation about the city of Baltimore, the effects of trauma, the work being done around the city. I'm the president of the International Brain Research Organization. I was recently in Ghana, Africa for their international conference that they hold in Africa. This was amazing. I talked about Baltimore. I talked about the work being done here. So you guys have been talked about in Africa. And it was from that conference that I really started thinking about how to intersect on things that are happening in the community with scientists. And why? Because every conference that I speak at on my science, they will ask, well, how did you get involved? Like, how did that happen? How do you get involved with city council? And so I know that there's interest, and that really is what has led to the Baltimore Trauma Summit. So day one, as I said, is going to be all of the community leadership. Many of you, thankfully, thank you for saying yes, are participating in this. As I said, Anne sent out the agenda. So this is going to be a big thing. The scientists that all of my colleagues from around the country who work at a very basic level, work in humans, trying to understand what trauma does and its effects, which is so important, ways to prevent it, ways to treat it, but also understanding outcomes. How do you know that you're doing better? How do you know that somebody is doing better? How do you know that you're doing better at prevention, et cetera? And so they're going to be there for the 2 days. So they're going to hear all of the amazing things that you all are doing and take it back to New York and Milwaukee and Atlanta and Minneapolis, California. They're all coming for this summit. So Baltimore is really going to be getting a lot of attention for all of the work that you all are doing. So I want to go back to that your experiences shape your lens, but they also shape your biology. And that's an epigenetics word that we talked about early on. The CDC has incredible data of the effects of the pandemic. And I want to talk just a minute about the science that I do on stress and trauma. Look at these data. I mean, this is early. This is only December in pandemic. And if you looked within the city of Baltimore, because our most vulnerable populations, the numbers are just really, really high, and they're not going to reverse anytime soon. And in part of that is the biology, that it has a lasting effect, whether it's anxiety or depression or PTSD. The most vulnerable populations are the ones the most impacted. And we need to understand what these lasting effects are, how it's going to affect kids in education in schools, how it's going to affect employability, how it's going to affect crime. You could have very well predicted the escalation we're seeing in a lot of ways in crime and violence in the city of Baltimore. We could have had this conversation early in the pandemic, because again, the effects are lasting. If you don't have the tools, if you don't have the social support network to deal with it, this is what's going to escalate. And this is exactly, I think, what we're seeing here. Again, thinking of our most vulnerable populations, women. We're seeing this across the board in science. I'm sure you're seeing it in your communities as well, that when you are women with young children, what's going to happen during the pandemic is that if there's no childcare, it's going to affect your ability in your job to perform. This is a lot of data that we're seeing with all the factors that affect women in science and other professions as well, right? It's hugely impactful, and this is going to be long lasting for people's careers. I like the analogy of using the tree, because if you look at a neuron, a tree looks a lot like it. If you think about what goes on below ground, that's all those things like social support, resource availability. So an African proverb I was reminded of is, the wind does not break a tree that bends, but how can you bend if you don't have access to those resources? Equity is such an important part of that. I tell my colleagues all the time, when I was in Ghana, they reminded me, yes, there's another proverb that's important here, that be humble, because even a large tree can be taken down by a small axe. I like the tree analogy. I think it's really important for thinking about the effects of trauma in our most vulnerable populations and the resources. The science that I do thinks a lot about trauma in humans and how do we model that to study it, and things like mice, not rats, Zeke. It's okay, mice, rats, I know. So how your risk, everybody on here, your risk for depression, anxiety, PTSD, hypertension, diabetes, it is a combination of multiple factors. It's the genes that you inherit. That's the G from your mom and dad. You can't change that. And you can't run away from your genes. They are what they are. But they are either escalated or diminished by the environment that you are in. And we know very much the environment that are most vulnerable are in: low resources, horrible access to healthy food, lots of stress in the environment. All of those things matter. The D is the developmental window, because you know what? It matters if your mom was stressed before she got pregnant. It matters if your mom has been stressed while she's pregnant. Trauma matters at all of those levels, and it affects how the baby's brain develops. But once you're born, that doesn't stop. The developmental windows of early life development, those first 5 years, really important. But it turns out puberty, that adolescent window, also really important. The brain is really maturing during that window. If you have social isolation, oh my God, the effect of the pandemic on the kids for the city of Baltimore who were socially isolated, it's going to be long standing. So we need to understand that biology so we can figure out how best to intervene in the treatments. And so that's what I just told you: the genetic risk, which you can't change, the environment we can change, and the developmental timing of when that happened. My lab studies everything from the sperm and the egg and how they come together, the trajectories thereafter, and environmental enrichment versus lack of resources, et cetera. We need to think a lot about that in the city of Baltimore, and all of these factors that matter. I'm not going to go into those. And again, our most vulnerable population, Black pregnant women, are our most vulnerable for mom's health and baby's health. Black women, regardless of resources and education, are 4 times more likely to die in pregnancy in the first year postpartum than white women with even a 6th grade education, right? So there's a lot to understand here about what shapes the stress of discrimination, lack of resources. This all matters for how we understand the biology, for who is at risk, how do we listen, and where do we intervene? Okay. This is actually data that came out of the School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry. Adverse childhood events determine a lot about your risk. The cut point for risk is 4 or more adverse childhood events prior to adulthood. If you look across the entire country, 4 or more ACEs for currently pregnant women is around 12.5%. In the city of Baltimore, it's 61%. That's a really important data point to understand for vulnerability in the city for why trauma matters, right? For longevity. This is just to say we can look at this in a scientific way in so many different ways. We can look at cells. We use mice so we can look at genes. We do human studies so we can understand the vulnerability, and then we take it back into the mice and the cells and back and forth. And that's how the science in my lab goes back and forth. I do all of the above. I do human research, I do mouse research, and I do cells. And really, we need to understand all of the above to understand and help our most vulnerable population. Okay, so I'm going to end there and take any questions that you have. Please follow us on Twitter if you are on Twitter. I follow most of you, and I love seeing all of the work being done in the community. And that's the piece that we try to be present for. And what I try to then, because I have a lot of scientists who follow me, and so they see what you're doing because I'm retweeting all the stuff that you do. And so I want to go back, I want to end on the summit. As I said, Anne sent out the agenda. If you have any questions about that, I'm here to answer them. It's June 15 and 16. It's at the convention center. Why? Because the room is going to be big enough. I don't care what happens with COVID. We'll have plenty of room to spread out. Food is provided on both days. Registration is free. Day one is going to be about Baltimore and the community. Day two is really going to be science, but you're welcome to attend both. Like I said, there's going to be all kinds of food present, which should be easy for us to spread out. We have Ballet After Dark is participating. We have the holistic, am I saying that right, Zeke? Holistic, the guys that do Holistic Foundation.
Holistic Life Foundation. Yep.
Yes, they're participating. So we're trying to make it not just didactic, boring listening, but like really interactive around trauma, what's happening in Baltimore, getting Baltimore some really positive media attention. We plan on doing lots of live tweeting. The communications office at the university is going to send this out to all of the local broadcasters to come and do actions about, like, here's positive things that are happening that all of you are doing. And day two will be science. And then they're all going to go back across the country to their communities and try and replicate what's happening in Baltimore. Okay. Questions?
Awesome. First off, Dr. Bale, let me say thank you so much for, one, coming and talking to us on the Trauma Informed Care Task Force, but two, championing Baltimore and really
Always, Zeke.
I know.
There's so much good stuff that's happening here. I'm so tired of Baltimore only getting negative attention. So really want to be positive.
So are we. So are every 26 person on this Zoom right now. So
and the haters are going to hate, as Zeke always says, the haters are going to hate, but I don't care. We can still really spread the word around the country about positive work being done here.
That's right. We are really proud of the work that this task force is doing and being the first city to have legislated trauma-informed care. Right. And I feel like there is a lot to learn. And apologies for saying rats instead of mice. Okay. Got rats on the brain. I dealt with one in a house of a constituent. And also the international, I'm gonna get this right this time. International Brain Research Organization is what I meant to say that you are the leader of, and that is awesome. So that's it. Anyone want to jump in with a question? I have one, but want to see. So the registration, like I said, is free. There is a code, and we only have to ask people to register because the catering, right? So we have to know the catering, and of course for like space limitations, but I'm not worried about that. I think we'll have plenty of space for everybody. We're sending out, many of you are already automatically registered because you're participating, but we're going to send out like the code, use it for anybody in your community space, anyone you're working with that you want to make sure they're there.
I was trying to raise my hand, but I just had a comment. First of all, thank you, Dr. Bale. You know, I typically just sit back and listen, but this is like very close to my own personal passion. I'm Kimberly with the Office of Youth and Trauma Services, and you know, we do trauma training across the city, and we certainly include a small bit of, you know, child brain development and things like that to support the understanding. For me personally, I'm also, you know, professionally have been studying the biochemistry of belief and emotion for faith science education, and it's just really, really important when it comes to, you know, really understanding how we heal and trauma. Neuroplasticity, all of this stuff plays a key role in why,
Kimberly, I like that.
Yeah, why CBT actually works.
Yep.
And then, with the support of the faith community, when it comes to belief and emotions, just my personal beliefs. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Baltimore City Health Department with this portion. I just think that it's really important for us to continuously identify moments to include science education, even if we call it something else. Because while, our desire and hope from the trauma perspective is there, really understanding the functionality of the body and the brain, mind, body, and all of that stuff really plays a role in how much faith we have and our ability to be successful. So just thank you for the work that you're doing.
And I've had so many Zoom meetings with many of you already, but everybody who's speaking. And one of the common things that kept coming up was, without biological measures, it's really hard to identify when whatever strategy you're using in whatever community space you're working in, how do you know you're being effective? So I've heard that again and again. And I think that's one of the take-home action items we're going to work on at the summit, is helping people partner up so that instead of having to write grants every month or whatever a lot of people are doing just to keep the organization running, if you had metrics, you could apply for bigger grants that are more sustainable. I think that would be a win-win.
Absolutely. I could talk about this all day, so I'm gonna be quiet, let somebody else ask a question. Thank you again.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for participating. Thank you. Anyone else?
Go for it, Phil.
So yes, a great presentation. And I think, back to the metrics, if you had to make a suggestion in the thinking about it, if the one or two things, not overall things, but in the short term, as you said, particularly with young people, we're getting ready for schools to end and for them to come back. And it would be great to be able to have something the groups that are working with these children over the summer could be measuring, because as you mentioned, the rates are going up. We also have rates of violence going up in the cities. So even though COVID's getting better, the violence isn't. And a lot of the supports that the young people get are through the schools. I mean, the schools have been very positive in terms of being a safe place for them. We don't have a lot, we have some incidents, but not nearly as many.
Yeah, but I think that the stress of the pandemic, just because the virus itself is improving in terms of hospitalizations and numbers, for those of us who have jobs and have social support and have, for many in the community, this effects of what the pandemic, that trauma, in addition to everything else people are coping with, is going to be long lasting. And I think that is the issue for a lot of the escalation in violence.
And so again, both in terms of right now, things that, because we have our work groups, our youth workers particularly focusing on, is there something we should be doing for the summer, before the summer, but also I think, thinking about your conference, because it'll be at the beginning of the summer and you'll have lots of great people there. What should we be doing when the youth come back to schools? Because again, that's a positive, at least they're all over the place. But now they're coming back to, there's a lot of schools, but it's still one institution that they're coming back to. And I think if the group over, I'm going to try to come to the meeting. That
would be great. So there'll be a lot of people from, for instance, Hopkins, Morgan, Coppin, and University of Maryland. For instance, in Maryland, some people out of social work, psychiatry, who are involved in the schools. And it would be great partnerships to work on in those 2 days to talk about what are some metrics and outcomes that could be added to their
so
work.
the mornings will be great. The afternoon, I'm actually teaching my course on creating trauma, healing and trauma public health. But no, but I think again, it'll be a very positive example. And that's one of the things the task force has been doing. And again, reaching out to Zeke, because he's always pulling in lots of different people to have these continuing discussions, trying to make sure, we're making progress and learning from each other. And I think, coming back to school.
We're back to the Zeke factor.
For doing some of these things.
Indeed. Yep.
Awesome.
All
right.
I will send the link and the code to Anne so she can send it out to all of you if you don't have for registration. I don't have that handy to post in there, but I'll send it to Anne so she can give it out if Anne doesn't already have it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Tracy.
Sure.
There's definitely a Tracy Bale factor. So, this woman is on fire. She is really a champion for this work, and she makes it come alive. I think, to Kimberly's point, just the importance of connecting faith and the science and how we all address this issue, and we all kind of come at it from our own lens, as you said, in our own lane, but never more important. I mean, I think, what you said is spot on in that I think we are seeing like the beginnings of a profound mental health crisis, in part driven by the pandemic, in part by just our like fractured politics and broken social safety net and deep inequities. All of it colluding to create some really bad outcomes.
The mental health space has not been a great functional one to begin with. Some reason in this country, we see mental health as different than health, which makes me crazy, because mental health is part of your health, right? It's part of how you function, and right. And so there's a lot of work to be done. So I think there are ways within the summit. My goal is to really make partnerships and connections so that even though I won't be here anymore, that I hope that people can carry forward with benefits.
Well, we appreciate you. Feel free anytime you want, stop by the Trauma Informed Care Task Force. We meet every other Thursday. And as you can see, it is great people coming.
Great work. And thank you all for everything that you do. It's so important to the community. So thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Appreciate you. We're looking forward to the summit. All right. So with that, again, huge round of thank you to Tracy, who is awesome and really a resource. I'm sad she's leaving, but if ever you want to go deep on the brain science of this work and understand sort of from a biological perspective what's going on with the epigenetic transfer of trauma, she is really good, and her lab is she's like on the cutting edge nationally in this work, so definitely a resource. All right, so with that said, Anne is going to blue us into work groups. Excited to keep it moving. I did want to put in another plug though before we do that. May 21st at 11 a.m. at City Hall, we are going to do a big convening of many of the mental health organizations in the city. We've been working on a document that lists all of the, or as many of the resources as we can possibly have. I think we, as Phil and others have said, there's a lot that is going on for our kids, especially in the summer where they're not in school and they don't have that kind of support. And so we want to make sure that Baltimore knows that there are many resources out there. And so the goal is for all of us to come together, the task force, all the different organizations that are doing extremely good work. And for this document to go out publicly, I'm going to tee up the news stations to get the hyperlink. But really it's for folks to be able to access, important resources in our city as we face a summer that has potential to be really challenging, but a summer that I hope will be a summer of healing for Baltimore. So with that, Anne, if you could beam us away.
Trying to remember which group is on the main screen tonight. I'm pretty sure it's policy. So policy, you will be here. And decolonizing, I will be with you here in just a minute. I'm going to get folks settled. So I'm going to open things up. All right. Sarah, I am not sure where you want to be. I think you're with the medical group.
I think that probably makes the most sense.
Okay. All right. I will group you with them.
And I'm actually now with the youth.
Oh, great.
And
Okay.
Brendan is with the training group.
Okay, perfect. Let me take you out of there and move you to youth. Perfect.
Thank you.
You bet. All right. Give me one second. All right. So Councilwoman Braumos and Fariha, Zeke, I think will be joining back with you, but he's with the medical group for a little bit. So he'll be back. Iris will also be back. She's with the training group for a minute and then she'll be back. So I'm going to leave you here while I go talk to decolonizing.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anne. Hi, Councilwoman Braumos. How are you doing?
Good. How are you? It's just us today.
I think so. For now.
There's a lot going on. So yeah, and I think from the last meeting, I still I'm working on the timing for my study and report because I've got all of us have a lot of other things going on. So it may not be until after the budget that we do it, but we'll make that happen. And then the other follow-ups was Iris able to get a meeting with so I'm supposed to get a meeting with Dana Moore. That's where I'm gonna just do this right now. And Iris was gonna get us another meeting also.
Yep. Let me go ahead and share the link to our notes in the chat box. Okay, I just got a message from Iris saying that she needs to be in a different committee right now that needs help, but I could share my screen and take notes for us.
Okay, I wasn't at the last meeting, so this is all new.
Okay, well, let me catch you up from the last meeting. Basically, last time we went to City Hall and we got a chance to connect with just in person as a task force overall. And then we got to connect as a policy subgroup. And basically,
I'm sorry that I missed it.
no worries. I know it was a really, really busy time of the year. But basically, the committee went through the reasoning behind the Victims of Violence Impact Fund. That's just a fund that we were talking about because Baltimore has seen just such an increase an uptick in violence and mental health. And Zeke was also talking about a constituent, actually a few constituents that had come up to him and asked him and just basically talked to him about the need for creating some sort of violence impact fund for victims. The situation was basically, people were victims of violent incidents and then they had no money to help themselves resolve the situation. So we went back and forth and talked about ideas for that. Zeke passed around just sample draft language that he had written up just for committee to give feedback on it. And we all read over it. Here were some of the comments that came up. Delegate Boyce was saying that she doesn't want to duplicate the fund that exists because apparently the state's attorney's office also has some sort of violence impact fund. And when we were researching that, we were just wanting a little bit more details on how much money sits in that pot. How is that money allocated to people? Is it done so in a transparent and equitable way? What are the funding streams that are coming in to create that money? And so based on the research that we had done, it was like 10 minutes of research, it wasn't extensive. We realized that the existing fund has provided $85,000 to victims over 4 years. So 300 people got money over 4 years. So we just felt like it's an opportunity for us to amplify the impact because when we split up 300 people over 4 years, it doesn't seem as impressive anymore. It's not even 100 people a year. And the money was predominantly raised through fundraisers. So we wanted to actually talk to the state's attorney's office and find out if, is this an area where they're interested in expanding, or does it make more sense to think about other pots of money in other departments and try to think through legislation to kind of increase the existing funds. One of my concerns was also that the state's attorney's fund seemed more like a charitable act, but it wasn't actually tied down by any legislation or policy. So when it stops being a goodwill gesture, I would just wonder what that means for the state of the fund and people who are going to get that money. And I appreciated that Zeke's draft bill actually had some sort of like, legislation and policy behind it that would hold, that would ensure that there's always a pocket of money. Hey, Monica, how are you? Okay, I think she went to a different group. We had another person join last time, Tiffany, and she offered really helpful feedback. She suggested the funds could be used to support families that have lost loved ones from opioids and other substances. And we were kind of going back and forth and talking about, like the opioid epidemic crisis is huge in Baltimore City, and what do the directly impacted need most? So people had ideas about maybe we can create like pamphlets and resources to share. But then we were thinking like a pamphlet and a resource is like a nice amenity to put together, but it's not the immediate thing that a family going through that situation needs. Tiffany was saying like, there's just mental health things going on. There might be financial stressors going on. So us just like handing somebody a pamphlet or a brochure isn't going to do much. And she wanted us to think more about like that personal connection and touch. So we talked at length about supports for people who have overdosed and who've gotten like Narcan and then, survived the overdose, as well as like just the loved ones who are impacted every time there's an overdose. And we talked about how there's always an officer called and it's treated as a crime scene instead of an overdose, and how that culture really needs to shift. And like after all the questioning by the police and the families, when everything is said and done, the survivor just kind of stays behind and sometimes even gets treated as criminal. And I think there's a real opportunity for healing and a proactive response. So we talked for a long time about that. And then we talked more about expanding the customer service experience and supporting the victim in real time, not just like, referring them to resources and supports and numbers, but even having like a fund available to call somebody an Uber to go home, because they might be stranded, if they drove across the city or caught buses across the city to get to a loved one, they don't have a way to get back home now. So we're talking about, can we have a fund available where there's like Ubers or some sort of referral process to get the person home and then follow up, with more support and mental health referrals, and even seeing like, do they have insurance? Do they know how to navigate insurance? What numbers do they call to get plugged into support groups? And we kind of ended saying like, that's the culture shift that needs to happen, and how people view the city wanting to help people through healing and recovery. And there's a lot of ties to this conversation and the 911 diversions that have happened with the pilot program that we're working on. But I think, part of the issue is that our current systems are not equipped to competently deal with crises that are happening. We don't have enough like funding allocated to those entities. And it just seems like the people who are responsible for addressing all of these are tired and exhausted, and like budgets need to shift to better support them. And then, so that was kind of a detailed wrap up of the whole conversation, but some next steps that we got out of that conversation were wanting to connect with the state's attorney's office. And they did that. Somebody talked to Arcelia Green at the state's attorney's office. And we're in the process of getting a lot more detailed information. And we also got a referral to the Family Bereavement Center. That was a resource the state's attorney's office provided. But the problem is the only bereavement center in the state, the only bereavement center in the state with a full-time staff to serve survivors of homicide. So there's only one. And even though they're fully staffed, they're specifically only supporting survivors of homicide. And we know a lot of other tragedies happen beyond homicide. So I think, one idea might be the resource list that Zeke is thinking of putting together as part of Trauma Informed Care Task Force. I wonder if we could have some subsections in that resource list to provide more alternatives, because I bet there's more available than just the Family Bereavement Center, but that's what we have so far.
I thought Roberta's house was a similar resource.
Thank you. Let me write that to the notes.
Their new office is on North Avenue. It's beautiful.
Okay.
And then going back to this issue of the sort of time spent by officers, and you said that officers are spending time on these when somebody overdoses, and it's more like, I wonder, one of the things we've asked for from the police department is a sort of a pie chart of time spent. And we haven't received it yet. And when I say we, I mean the public safety committee. And that will be, I don't know if that was one of the categories that we asked for, but that is something that I probably should ask for, because it would be, when you do that pie chart of how much time police spend on certain things, then you can actually see what should be pulled out, right? And so one thing was like, time spent on mental health crises, time spent on car crashes, time spent on, and it would be interesting to kind of see how much time they're spending at scenes like that, and whether or not it's better to send, the police haven't done this yet, but they should, social workers to the scene rather than, you know what I mean? Like I would totally favor if the police department was going to hire civilians for that kind of work. Right now they're hiring civilians for doing like detective stuff. So anyway, just as a side note, around those items.
Yeah, I love your idea to hire civilians and actually start like redistributing who shows up to different, just situations that are happening. And I would love to see a pie chart of, time spent by police, like you're saying, and how much time are police actually spending in situations. And also just like living in Baltimore City, I often see like 4 or 5 or 6 cop cars roll up to a scene when it doesn't seem to be like a really dangerous scene. The whole situation seems to be contained and in control. So I'm also thinking about just like, how smart are we with our police budget and how many cops are actually showing up to a scene? What is the risk level of that situation? How many cops do we actually need to deploy? And my suspicion is that once we get the pie chart back, then we can start asking some of those questions and, redeploying police officers to other situations and places where they may be needed, or simply just, asking social workers and people who can actually respond to mental health crises to show up instead of police officers. So we're not, punishing people and making it a criminal moment when it really could be like a healing moment.
Right.
Different that is needed.
So as part of the consent decree folks did sort of this inventory of time that a police officer should be spending as a way to measure how many police officers we needed. And I have to look at that inventory again, but like car crashes is not in there. And the mental health is in there, but then this other piece about like overdoses and that, I think it's treated separately in those categories, but I need to look at that again. But once we have the pie chart, that helps us a lot with information about how we can redistribute that time and also have a recalibration of actually how many officers we need.
Absolutely. Earlier, I heard you say that you have already requested a pie chart as part of the Public Safety Committee. Do you think that the pie chart and the data request will sufficiently address the questions that we have, or do we need to like see if we can add another question?
I need to go back. I haven't gotten it yet, so I need to go back to them and see if I can add a couple of other categories to the to what should be distributed, what should be articulated in the chart, in the pie chart.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that. Trying to see if there's anything really pressing you missed last time. Besides,
Yeah, I apologize for having to miss the in-person one.
no,
Are we
no.
doing like once a month in person, or that was the only one?
I think so far that was the only in-person event planned. I think from like a logistics and scheduling perspective, you know, a 90-minute meeting becomes a 3-hour-long meeting when we.
I know, exactly. I'm learning that now that we're kind of transitioning back, we have to pad the time a little bit more.
Right.
We can't do back-to-backs anymore. It's funny.
And then we also, in addition to the Family Bereavement Center and the Roberta's House edition that you noted, we also brainstormed some other places that have funds, and, you know, possibly could we bring these resources together? And I will share those notes in the chat box and read them out loud. So there's a link in the chat box, and it takes you to the Maryland Criminal Injuries Compensation Board website. And so both the website and the brochure. And basically the details in the brochure suggest that it's medical expenses only related to physical injury. It's also expenses for psychological injury incurred as the result of certain offenses. It could also include bereavement leave up to 2 weeks or $2,000, a loss of earning, which is directly related to the victim's inability to work following the crime. It could also be total or partial, permanent, or temporary disability, funeral expenses in the case of a homicide, loss of support or dependency when a homicide victim was providing support to the claimant, and other expenses as approved by the board. And it's up to 30 days and lost wages for a parent or guardian caring for a child injured by crime. So I know this list that's been put together, we actually didn't have this research done at the last Trauma-Informed Care Task Force meeting. So I'm thinking like one possible next step could be putting this list in front of everybody, like Nika and Zeke and Delegate Boyce and kind of everybody, and seeing, you know, are there certain groups or categories or instances that are not currently covered by this fund? That's what I'm thinking, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, actually, Delegate Boyce has been doing a lot of work on this issue of bereavement. So whatever she recommends, I think it's a good idea.
Okay. Yeah, and her biggest thing was that she always wants to expand on top of efforts and coordinate and bring groups who are working on similar things together, instead of like duplicating efforts and, you know, splitting ourselves in really thin in multiple directions. And I thought that was a great idea.
Mm-hmm. Do we know more about going back to the work that we were doing on the 311, the 911 diversion? I didn't see in the preliminary budget an increase, but I could have missed it. I have to take a look. We should probably ask.
Can you repeat the question that you want asked?
We were doing work on the 911 diversion, and figured that it was really money that was needed, and I just don't know. I didn't see an increase in the budget for Baltimore Crisis Response in the preliminary budget. But it's not very detailed, so I could have missed it.
Thank you. Yeah, to me, it just in our notes, it says that we had reached out to Dr. Dana Moore and BCRI, and they would love to have a discussion with our committee. I think we're just still waiting to find a date and a time that works with everybody. And we told Anne that it would be helpful if BCRI could come directly and talk to us during one of
Right, at one of our meetings, because we're here. Yeah.
Here, exactly. So I can follow up with Anne on that. And then I also wonder what the timing of the pilot is, because I remember from attending that presentation, Ali was telling us that like the full circle of the pilot needs to finish, and it's like maybe like a 1-year pilot or something. And based on that data, they were going to decide what to do with the budget expenses. But I feel like it's a good program.
I feel like that they're not going to then get into the budget cycle because I don't remember when it launched.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it'd be devastating to wait for an entire full year for the next budget cycle when like crime and violence is happening right now and we need it right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That is if that, I mean, there are additional funding, there's additional funding elsewhere for things like that as well that they can continue to raise money for. But, in terms of the budget document is a values document. And there's other money that I'm pushing for, particularly for the housing piece, that I need to see in the final budget. It would be, if there are things that we were expecting, like the 911 diversion, that we need to see, we kind of need to know that before we go into budget hearings in a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the time is now to look at the preliminary data and ask these questions and try to get more budget allocations. You're totally right. Our budgets are our values and our morals and our principles. And, when we talk the talk, we also have to make sure that our budget supports it.
It's amazing. It's important. I mean, the police budget did increase, but not as much. And we are fully funding our obligation to Kerwin in the budget. Our obligation is 50 million extra on top of what we already give to the schools. But we're not funding the housing work that I wanted to make sure happened and that the mayor had said would happen. We're not funding, and this is outside of ARPA, because our budget is not considering ARPA, because ARPA is a one-time thing. It's a separate piece of money. It also was counted in last year's budget. So the spending of it is not going to be included, just so you know, included in this budget. So obviously we've been doing a lot with a lot of the ARPA money, and that's 4-year money. And I'm glad for it, believe me. We do want to see other things in the budget, I think, as well.
I think so too. And it's personally disappointing to me to hear that, like, you've been such a great advocate for housing, and it's personally disappointing for me to hear that, the full budget that you wanted, you're not actually seeing, it come to fruition. And
We'll
I just
see.
wonder, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I wonder as a community, like what can we do, if anything, to advocate for, more equitable housing allocations and housing budgets, because the vacancy problem across Baltimore City is huge, and good housing policy, I think, is good crime policy, and it is good.
It absolutely. And this is what we've talked about before, is that for me, this is our crime fight. If people are not in stable housing, they can't even heal from their trauma, right? And it could actually have been one of the causes of trauma, right? And then if people are living in areas where it looks like nobody cares, how are they supposed to feel about that? And the science is even there. If a student is walking to school with where vacant properties are, the cortisol already starts to shoot up in their brain and blocks learning. That stress really blocks learning. And so it is all interconnected. So I think, we did get 100 million from the ARPA for housing. We just need a lot more. So we're working on it. It's so yeah, I think it would be interesting for us actually as a committee to look at the preliminary budget at the next meeting, and just kind of understand what the priorities and what the obligations of the city are on the spending, so that the councilman and I can ask the questions around, what the priorities are and that kind of thing. I think that might be a helpful exercise for this subgroup at the next meeting. We only have the preliminary. No, by next meeting, we will have the full budget. Right, we meet again before Memorial Day, so we'll have the full budget and have a much better understanding of what's in there.
Yep, so our next meeting is on May 19th.
Yeah, we will have the budget by then, the full budget.
And sorry, I'm not that well versed in the timeline of the budget cycle for Baltimore City. When you say we'll have the full budget, does that mean like the preliminary budget where there's still an opportunity for city council to make input and ask questions, or does that mean it's the finalized budget at that point?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So the budget that we get is introduced on May 16th. So we will go into budget hearings and ask questions right after Memorial Day. And then the budget gets passed on June 13th. And so that's the opportunity to negotiate. We still, as the city council, do not have the opportunity to move or to add. We can only cut. So but we can ask the tough questions.
Okay. So I know that I thought there was a law that was passed in the last couple of years that gave city council a little bit more power with the budget.
Yeah, it doesn't count until next budget. Next.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Fariha, hey y'all.
Hey.
Then we can cut and move. Like right now, we can just cut. And like we got into this whole thing a little bit before Odette got on the council, where we cut money from BPD, and then Jack Young, our former mayor, was like, "I'm not doing none of what y'all want." He was upset and bitter at the time, and so he gave like a 0.1% penny property tax decrease. Like basically, the money just vanished into thin air. And our hope was that it would go to Safe Streets and this and that. Yeah, one thing, and I know, sorry,
it came up, Zeke, it came up just because I started talking about some of the housing stuff I was hoping to see in the budget. And then maybe that our subcommittee can look at the budget next meeting. And I don't think Gabe and I will have got a chance to go through the whole thing, but at least we can do some highlights for the committee and see, if there are key questions for you and I to ask during budget hearings.
Yeah, I think so, Councilwoman Ramos. And I think like the other thing that I was going to bring up too is like, even within, even though we cannot add money, like typically what happens is the mayor, each council member or a group of council members are able to advocate for certain things to get funded to an extent. Like we're not like, they're not going to give us $10 million each and say like, go have that, but they will come around and say like, what are your priorities? What do you want to see happen? Part of how we were able to fund the Healing City Act, like the first city budget money that went in was, I said to Brand, the mayor last year, like, listen, you have stood on this thing, you've been a leader in it, you've, touted it, you've done press conferences with it, you got to put up some money. So he ended up doing $340,000 in the health department, which like got us off the ground to do trainings. And then ultimately he added the 1.4 million of ARPA money. And we're off to the races. But, one thing I was going to say, Odette, is like maybe one thing the subcommittee could do is like pick two, like maybe it's one of the housing things that you're interested in, and then maybe it's the BCRI that we were talking about originally, as like, look, we know they need more money, and push the administrator, like that be one of your and my joint asks for them.
Yeah, that's actually how this came up, because I was wondering, I hadn't seen the increase in the BCRI in the preliminary budget, but the preliminary wasn't very detailed, So, and then Fariha reminded me that maybe the pilot was a whole year. And so would it even be any increases be in the budget? And I was like, oh man, that would be terrible. So, so I think we want to ask questions based on the priorities that the committee's been working on, with some of this. So.
Yeah, I agree. And then like the committee, we should think about like how we want to advocate both publicly and behind the scenes. Like I have no problem saying to Michael, Huber, sorry, Fariha, the mayor's chief of staff, look, like, again, you guys are talking really, really, really big and, leading nationally around public health as a violence solution. But when I look at this institution that is supposed to be doing 911 diversion and not having, just a police first response, is woefully underfunded. Let's put more money into that. I'd be happy to make that one of my asks or one of our shared asks. Because I think, whether they're it's pilot or not, like they just, we just gotta fund that thing.
And I think both of those, the BCRI and like police diversion directly ties in with the goals that we'd laid out for this committee, as well as housing. Earlier, Councilwoman Ramos and I were talking about how like good housing policy, is good housing policy is good crime policy. Good trauma-informed care policies, and the way that our providers and possibly the police show up to a situation ends up directly making a difference into people's lives. So, I think all of the dots can be connected. And when I really appreciate both of your willingness to, always advocate for more, for better policies, and to make sure that our budgets actually align with, the values that we have. And I think that would be the absolute right move. It goes directly into goal 1, creating policies that undo the impact of disinvestment in housing, community, and economic development. And that's, a goal that this Trauma-Informed Care Task Force Committee has been working on for almost a year. And then the BCRI 911 diversion, that was one of the first projects that this committee, took interest in, and we've been following that pilot pretty closely. So I'd love to see the results of that pilot. And if the results, even if it's preliminary results and the pilot is not complete, I think there's still good data and good evidence that allows us to advocate for increases in that budget.
Yeah, 100%. And one thing I would add, just seeing Dr. Daniels on the screen, is, he and Build Baltimoreans United Leadership Development did a phenomenal job advocating around ARPA with my colleague, who's also on the Zoom as well, to make sure that housing really was a priority in the mayor's, $643 million. And, we're able to get 100 million. Kevin and them were able to get a commitment of 50 million toward the strategy of that they've been working on in Johnston Square with Rebuild Metro, and like using organizing in order to move block by block in a really strategic, thoughtful way. But again, I think it would be great for this subcommittee, and Kevin, I'd be curious, your take on this, to put some of our muscle into, whatever it is, Odette and Dr. Daniels, like whatever policy housing thing we want to do, push for that in the budget, and then push for BCRI in the budget. And
I've already outlined to Michael, in order to make the judicial interim system work so that all of those organizations can get the land that they need, we need 8 new lawyers. And Commissioner Kennedy asked for them. They are not approved yet. I actually said to the administration, I'm not voting for the budget until this is in there. And because that is the key to getting everything else done. If we can't get the land to those organizations so that it's super low acquisition costs, or homeowners, whoever, how we want to distribute it, then we're not doing it. We're not doing the strategy. So to me, that, I may get it in the final budget and then I'll be happy, I won't be happy, but at least it'll be better because this is a $3 billion problem and we need, a lot more commitment than just, I'm going to give you 50 million at some point in time out in the future. Like, where is it? And we need commitment that they're going to raise the money. We need commitment that they're going to be, really using this I know that they're going to be using this as a strategy, but if they don't have the dollars behind it, it's not going to work. So that's kind of where we are at the moment on that.
Yeah, and thank you, Councilwoman, because we did talk about that in the bill meeting this morning. Exactly what she said, of course, and again, being able to, because we know that the mayor's team and he did make that commitment to every year, and we also did say that we would be working together with the city to get private and other dollars to make sure that we reach that goal each year, as the councilwoman said. We agreed to do that, but again, and then building coalitions are really being built at this point around that strategy is what she's talking about. Boots on the ground, building that coalition, and almost prepared to hold them accountable for the commitment. Bill, when you make a commitment.
But here's the thing, is that 50 million is not there. And we're about to pass these bond issues that doesn't have it.
Yeah.
So we should talk again, Dr. Daniels, because I'm putting in to create a housing finance agency, which would actually help to raise the money and then get it out the door. And so there's, and the money's out there. It's there. We just gotta go get it. It's
our 90-day review to him is coming up. I think it's in the May, June. So, they're going to come back and say, where are we? And that's just the nature of who the build is. I mean, they're going to come back and say, you said that this was going to happen and this is going to happen every year. Where is it? Yeah. So, at this point,
because I think what they said was that the 37 million of the 100 million would go in, and then we'd get an extra 11 million somewhere for this year. I didn't see it in the preliminary budget. Okay. And then it's how are we getting that every year after that? But 50 million is still not enough.
Right.
It's not enough.
But the mayor agreed with us to 100 million a year, and that we would help find some of those private dollars, but we would work along with the city in order to get that. So they'll be back at him because he said yes.
Right. And with the understanding that it's not just for Rebuild Metro, it's for the city to do its work. Right. Exactly.
That is absolute. And we're building the coalitions as we speak of developers that are saying, oh, I like this idea. So, yeah.
I think if you don't mind, I've been actually going back to the community development groups that I used to be a part of, and just talking about the digital in-rem so they know how to use it and know how to advocate for it. And so that's another group of the nonprofit folks that really should be engaged in this right. as well, because everybody needs money.
Right.
So,
and I think it'll be a perfect to a citywide strategy, because we know that trauma has been a part of this process for years. And I guess we made that point several times, but we're looking forward to really moving this needle. I'm glad to hear that we was, I jumped in late. I just finished my last class at school, but I'm glad I came in at this time to hear this, because we just got finished talking about it this morning.
Thank
No,
you. I think that's definitely the right direction. I noted one of our next steps is, as a policy subcommittee, we should look at the preliminary budget at our next meeting, and specifically think about how to best advocate for BCRI budget increases, and then think about a specific housing policy or area to hone in on for the budget increase. I personally don't know how to access the preliminary budget links. Could I get some support with accessing that?
It's not online. It's not online. The whole budget will be online after May 16th.
Okay. Zeke, if you're talking to us, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
No, sorry. I'm talking to my daughter who's running around in the background. She's gonna try to go pee by herself.
Yeah. So the preliminary budget, I don't believe is online, but the full budget will be online on Monday, the 16th, because that's when we get it. Or maybe it's the 17th, but we get it on the 16th and we'll dig in. I'm excited.
Okay, perfect. I'm making a note for myself to try to Google it on the 16th or 17th, and then I'll just remind everybody in our subcommittee to kind of look it over so that when we come into the meeting, it's not the first time that we're all looking at it and we kind of have some questions sorted, but I'll also plug in some time for us to, review it.
That would be great. And yeah, I mean, I think we should narrow down what those two asks should be. I think definitely Odette and I should ask all the questions. We should come up with questions for the hearings, but the piece around housing, and I agree with the councilwoman that, and Kevin, we talked about this a little bit, but DC is just severely lacking in capacity in a number of ways. And so they ain't gonna be able to do this with their current staff, just period. Not by a long stretch. So, council member, you're closer to the thing, but whether it's lawyers or, folks in the policy shop, I don't know what it is, but they definitely need to staff up. And so maybe that is one of the,
They really do. And there's part of it is there are positions that can be filled, and some of it is the money. So we'll see what the final budget comes out with in that regard. But it's not only just, there's the whole permit office that has to be redone. There's so many parts to this. And I need to see it, that they're actually being serious about it in the budget. So, wow. Yep.
But yeah, let's, as a subcommittee, let's get strategic on, and precise on what we want those asks to be, and then make it public.
Absolutely. That sounds like a great plan to me. Thank you so much for all of your work and advocacy. Everybody, I put our notes and our next steps in our policy subcommittee planning document, and I'll follow up with a WhatsApp message once the preliminary budget is public.
Let me ask one more thing, because I know 7 o'clock we gotta go, but Freehead, do we want to try and bring the director of BCRI one more time before we do the thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to get
That's what we asked. Yeah, if we could. It's so much easier if she could come today on these meetings, or he could come to these meetings.
Let me make a point. I'm gonna take a note to try to get him to show up next task force meeting.
I'd also love to ask them, bottom line, what's the minimum amount of dollars that you need to make this an effective program?
I'm on that, and I will see if we can get him for our next task force meeting for at least 10, 15 minutes to, obviously he's going to be a little bit circumspect, I think, but, we should ask exactly that question and have him answer it.
Yeah, let them know it's a safe space. We want to be their advocate. He shouldn't dance around.
Right. All right, y'all. Appreciate you all, and catch you soon.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.